This is Locked On Sports Atlanta, and it's time for the Atlanta Football Party, only on Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
To the Atlanta Football Party, your home for the best Atlanta Falcons football talk. It's local insight you can't get anywhere but here at Locked On. I'm your host, Tenitra Batiste, alongside me, your Falcons analyst, Jarvis Davis, and Locked On Falcons host, Aaron Freeman. Senior Falcons reporter Tori McElhaney will be back next week. And our Atlanta Football Party is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So they didn't rank raw high. We will discuss. And how does the dialogue hit different for the offense? We'll download on that too. Also, MPX received a high honor in his hometown. We'll talk about it. But first, let's see if Free feels a different way today. So, Aaron, Jalen Walker with Arnold Ebiketie alongside him participated in the Sack Summit this past weekend. Since you didn't really care, unbothered if Kyle Pitts showed up for tight end, you were not. Didn't really care that Charlie Warner showed up for tight end, you. I was just wondering if it even mattered to you that Jalen and AK gave it a go in Vegas.
I mean, not really, but I'm glad they did. It's like I'm happy that they did the work. Right. It's just my stance is just like I don't really care whether or not, like, at the end of the day, like, basically, the last time the Falcons had an 8-sack guy, he skipped the sack summit so that he could play basketball and raise money for charity for the Boys and Girls Club. That's Vic Beasley, for those of you that don't know what I'm talking about. And that was a huge deal back in 2019 when Vic Beasley skipped the sack summit, and it was like, oh, clearly he does not care. But yet, every time we talk about the Falcons pass rush, we say we haven't had an 8-sack guy since Vic Beasley. We haven't had a double-digit sack guy since Vic Beasley. So the point of me saying all that is that basically whether or not you show up to these sack summits or tight end university or OL masterminds isn't the sort of thing that determines whether or not you're a successful player or not. And so for me, it's like, hey, if you go to these things, great, awesome, do you. If you don't go to those things, great, awesome, do you. All I care about is whether or not you perform on the field September through January. And, again, these things can help, but the idea that you show up to one of these things automatically means you're going to be successful during the season, or you don't show up to one of these things means that you won't be successful for the season. Because clearly Vic Beasley, right, the secret to getting 8 sacks in Atlanta Falcons is just play basketball to raise money for the Boys and Girls Club, because that's the last time a player did that. He got 8 sacks in a season. So, like, if we're doing off-season training, then basically don't train and just play basketball, and that's the key to getting 8 sacks. If that's the road we're going down, that's basically all I'm trying to sit here and say. It's like,
and so that little guy,
at the same time, it doesn't matter nearly to the degree that people like to make it out to be.
Yeah, so it didn't matter that Big Beasley had a future. Yeah, it didn't matter that Big Beasley had a future Hall of Famer lining up there. But I'm just, never mind, Dwight Freeney. But anyway, okay, I hear you, Free. It's like for you, you don't really care what they do during the offseason. As long as they produce when it matters, that's what it's all about. But for you, Jarvis, did it at all make you excited, happy, pleased? I mean, how did you feel when you found out that, hey, Jalen Walker is actually going to be at the Sack Summit and Arnold Ebiketie as well? Because I think for me, well, you know what? I'll hold my thought. I'll hold my mule until, Jarvis, you go ahead and release your commentary.
All right. So for me, when I hear Jalen Walker is there, I'm not surprised, because that's just the type of dude he is, right? Any type of information he's seeking out and, trying to gather as much information as possible so he can have success, once the season gets started. And I think that, Jalen has always been that type of guy, just when going back to his days from Georgia and being the son of a head coach and just understanding, like, you can get as much information as possible and you digest it to where you can understand it. And then you go out there and use it and be able to execute. So I wasn't surprised at all when I heard Jalen was out there, or when I saw Jalen was out there. As far as on the Ebiketie goes, I think it's just kind of interesting. Because here, follow me here, Free T. I think he cramming for the test, because this man going to a contract year. He has the potential to get paid a lot of bread, whether it be with the Falcons or with someone else. Because guess what? man, when you go into that contract year, you're a second round pick, so you don't got the extra 5th year of comfort, right? So, like, hey, man, I gotta get paid this second contract. That's what it's all about when you get to the NFL. So I think he is just, and I kind of look at it from a standpoint of, I use Leonard Floyd as an example. Like when he got to Chicago, he was considered a bust essentially because, they allowed him to go in free agency. And then once he left for free agency, he understood that I need to get some more information on how to do this thing that we call getting to the quarterback, because it's not as easy as it was for college. Because look at Leonard Floyd, length, height, all that stuff. He got the makeup to be able to do it. Right now, I'm sounding like Terry Fonda. Oh my gosh, what is going on in the world today? So and when you look at it from that standpoint, is like you have to understand when you're in NFL, the level of competition is not what it used to be. So in order to get that information that you need to be successful, that's what Leonard Floyd did. And I think that Arnold Ebiketie is on that same level as far as, I understand my situation. I need to get all the answers to that test that I can possibly get so I can use those bad boys on 3rd and long when I'm out there trying to get home.
Yeah. And, Jalen Walker was kind of one of I'll call him the superstars of the weekend just because, or stars of the weekend, because there was so much commentary on social media about him. I think one of the comments was, hey, if he clears your offensive tackles outside shoulder, your QB is seriously in danger. And they were just talking about how he was putting so much of a focus on getting his hands where they needed to be.
His eyes. He's just rolling his eyes.
No.
I don't. Still having this conversation.
I was looking at something else, and my eyes moved in a certain way. That was not me rolling my eyes at what team.
Oh, okay. That was not a side eye from you, Free. Okay, all right. Just wanted to confirm. But real talk, Free, I think that Jarvis does make an excellent point that I just wanted to circle back to you on as well about Arnold Ebiketie. And again, not so much that it matters just from the rationale that you had mentioned about being there or not being there, but maybe sort of like, okay, Aaron, it's one more thing to show he understands this really is a make it or break it season for him.
Yeah, I think, again, the moral of the story is players should do whatever they think is in their best interest to play good football, right? Yeah. And I think this is an indicator that Arnold Ebiketie thinks it's in his best interest to, hopefully pick up, some tricks of the trade, especially given how much of a technical pass rusher he was coming into the league. And we haven't really seen that kind of show itself in the ways that I think a lot of us thought it would when it came to his potential to be that sort of breakout pass rusher. I think we've seen steady improvement across his 3 years in Atlanta, and we're hoping to see that trend continue in year 4, as Jarvis is saying, especially with him, being in a contract year, having an opportunity to get paid a lot of money, where basically if you're a halfway decent pass rusher, you can make easily $15-20 million a year, on the open market. And so I think it's a good sign that Arnold Ebiketie is putting in this work. Hopefully it will translate on the football field. And as I've said before on previous Atlanta football parties and Locked On Falcons, like if I'm betting on anybody on this defensive line to get 8 or more sacks this upcoming season, I would bet, I would put more money on Arnold Ebiketie than anybody else in this group based off of that. And so this is just, that's adding fuel to the fire. Maybe I'll put a few more bucks on that bet based off of Arnold Ebiketie going to the Sack Summit.
Yeah, and you're right. It's determined by how you feel, like where you are in the process, because we won't know for what, guys, another maybe 2 or 3 weeks. But I'm sure there's going to be some conversation with James Pierce Jr. about, hey, JPJ, what did you do in that 5 weeks between voluntary or mandatory mini camp and training camp? So we'll find out a little bit more about what his training regimen may have looked like, because, of course, at least from social media returns and other outlets, JPJ didn't necessarily attend that Sack Summit, but I'm sure, like I said, in a few weeks, we'll find out a little bit more about what his regimen looked like in that off period, so to speak. Now, we've been talking a little bit about, speaking of mandatory mini camp and training camp, about some of the things, maybe signs that we saw during mini camp that might show how players can separate themselves, how they've improved themselves, where they can improve. So just wanted to wrap that up with some of the guys on offense and also on special teams. And you can answer either way, whether it was something you saw in mini camp that separated that guy or something you want to see in training camp that separates? Let's start with the group of wide receivers for you, Free.
Yeah, I mean, I think the wide receivers is probably of, maybe besides the running back position, probably the group that you feel the best about headed into the season, just because you have Darnell Mooney and Drake London coming off their best seasons, Ray McLeod coming off their best seasons. And so for me, like coming out of the offseason and heading into training camp, like there isn't to me a lot that I'm looking for from that group, because I think we kind of know who the top 4 guys are, sort of entrenched with London, Mooney, McLeod and Kadero Hodge. Now, maybe, there could be a battle between Hodge and McLeod to sort of see who's going to get the bulk of the number 3 spots or something like that. But like, to me, the real conversation about this wide receiver room is just like, who's going to be maybe that 5th or 6th guy that emerges in that group in training camp. And, it's kind of a toss up. Is it Casey Washington? Is it Nick Nash? You have Jamal Agnew in the building, potentially to be return specialist and probably not necessarily in the wide receiver mix because he'll have a role on special teams. But like, some of these other guys in that wide receiver room, who's going to be sort of the emerging guy? Like there were moments where Chris Blair seemed like he was going to be that guy late last season with him and Michael Penix. And then the Washington game happened and it was like, okay, well, that moment kind of went by out the window, but does he get that back or something like that? So like, to me, the wide receiver room is just like, who's going to be that final guy on the roster that emerges this summer? And so far, I think through mini camp that we haven't had that clear cut answer. And I'm hoping we'll get that in a couple of weeks when training camp kicks off.
Yeah.
I think for me, I'm looking for just health. Health is wealth, I feel like, with this group, because like I said, Darnell Mooney proved that, hey, I can be that number 2 guy. Absolutely. I can be the deep threat for this team. A quarterback can count on me to do that. Start off a little shaky, but hey, they finally figured that thing out. And then of course, Drake London, I remember asking him a question about being wide receiver 1. He was very short to the point. Yeah, man, that's what I'm trying to do. That's what I'm going to be, whatever, so I think when you look at it from that standpoint, those guys understand their roles. There's no conversations that need to be had. Ike Hilliard has laid it all out. He understands what those guys can do and what they did in their first year in this offense. So now it's just all about, okay, can you stay healthy? And what does year 2 look like in this offense with a more comfortable offensive coordinator, with a quarterback that's capable of pushing the ball down the field on a consistent basis, maybe adding a little bit of a run element, play action to this offense. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, but I feel like the sky's the limit for this group. And when people were talking about back in April about, the Falcons need to look at a wide receiver, I was like, well, why? Why would you waste a pick on that position? So exactly. I think this is probably one of the more solid groups right behind the offensive line, in my humble opinion, as far as what's coming back and what they can be, because we know what they've already shown that they can do it. It's just a matter of them just being out there and being healthy.
Yeah. And for you, Free, what about the tight end room?
Yeah, I mean, it's all about Kyle Pitts, right? Like it's, that's what is Kyle Pitts doing? When he's not at tight end university, how healthy is he going to be?
Well, he's hurt. He couldn't do mandatory minutes. He's hurt. He's hurt.
We'll see. So, I think the health is going to be a big part of it when it comes to training camp. Is he going to be on the pitch count? And does that hold him back from, getting up to speed with Michael Penix? Because we sit here and we talk about, okay, we've had 18,000 different quarterbacks here in Atlanta over the last 4 years. Maybe this new guy is going to be the thing that unlocked Kyle Pitts. And if he's, missing the first 3 weeks of training camp and barely practicing, like that doesn't necessarily bode well for that. So like, it's really just, constantly trying to figure out what's going on with Kyle Pitts. Is he due to a breakout? Will he continue to be disappointing? All those various things. And that to me is the thing that we just don't have an answer, because he's been missing time, as Jarvis said.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just in a space where whatever Kyle Pitts brings to the table this year is extra. It's extra. I'm depending on the running game. I'm depending on this offensive line getting better, being more cohesive. I'm feeling on them taking advantage of Michael Penix arm strength and health. hopefully, to take this offense to the next level. As far as what Kyle Pitts, my expectations for him, they are what they are, and they're not that high.
Well put and succinctly put, Jarvis. Okay, so what about the tackles, Free? What is it for you that you're looking for in the left and right tackles?
Not a whole lot. I mean, it's just like Jake Matthews, Caleb McGarry. I know what you are. It's just a question of, can you continue to be what you have been for this football team for the last couple of years as those guys get older? What does the depth situation look like? How ready is Jack Nelson? Is he this multi-year project type of player? Storm Norton, Brandon Parker also kind of being up there in age for backups and all that stuff. So it's just like, do you have young players that are up and coming like Jack Nelson, and do you have too many veterans that are on the wrong side of 30? That's kind of my question. But I think for the most part, it's fine. It's going to be fine.
Can Caleb McGarry push for another contract? Can he have that type of year? Can he be healthy? And can he push to play well enough to get another contract with his team? That's going to be the big thing for me. And can we count on Jake just to be Jake again? He's kind of like been pinned in as a starter, and we expect him to be there every game, but like, how realistic is that the further he gets up in age?
All right. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about the guards, the center, special teams, but also about Ra and why he was ranked so high. We'll discuss that when we take all that under further review. This episode of our Atlanta Football Party is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever wish managing your money felt easier with Monarch Money? It can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Now, Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. Monarch Money is a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. So listen, you can start tracking your spending. You can look at things like takeouts, subscriptions, and whether or not you need to really pay more attention to how much you're eating out and how many of those monthly subscriptions are really getting away from you. Take control of your finances, your subscriptions, your fast food orders to go with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half of your first year. Monarchmoney.com to take control of your finances. All right, Free, we'll wrap up our conversation on what we maybe saw in minicamp that gave some signs about what we'll see in training camp. Let's talk about the guards.
Yeah, I mean, we know what Chris Lindstrom is. It's, this year is really about, what is Matthew Bergeron going to be? Is he going to make that leap to be, more than just a solid to average guard that I think he was last year? Will he be a player, particularly when it comes to the run game, being that impactful player? And again, as we've discussed a number of times here, mini camp is not really the time for guys in the trenches to really show what they can be. So I'm looking forward to what he can do in training camp when he actually gets to hit, another human being rather than a blocking sled.
Yeah, Bergeron, I mean, I'm with him. I wholeheartedly agree with Free because, Bergeron got a little mean streak to him.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if he's going to really lean into that along with and bring the play along with it, because I don't really care for offensive line who talk trash and aren't really that good. So if he can kind of bring that level of trash talk, that doggish stuff that he has in him, that comes out from time to time, if he can kind of translate that into making that jump into being better than average, right? Because, you would hope somebody be a little bit more than average if you draft them that high in the second round. So for me, I feel like it's all about that jump with Bergeron. Like, how far does he jump and how does he really lean into who he's trying to be, which is one of those nasty guards that people always kind of question whether or not he's going to be worth the money that he's probably going to get if he continues to ascend like we think he can.
And what about the centers, Jarvis? What in terms of, or the center, what in terms of Ryan Newsel did you see? And I know it's tough to see something in minicamp, but maybe what did you see that maybe you're like, okay, this is informing me of what I want to see in training camp?
Big thing, I want to see that drop off not be that too big. I don't want to see that big of a drop off from Drew Dalman, right? Because we understood what the financial situation was with the Falcons and them not even really having the offer for Drew because of the money that they knew he was probably going to get on the open market because they had a guy who started 8 games for you in Ryan Newsel. So I don't want to be sitting around after that first game and Ryan Newsel has allowed Vita Vea to just go hammo, and everybody like, oh man, Vita Vea, he's a really good player. If we're saying that, that means Ryan Newsel didn't have that good of a game. So I'm just looking for. I'm okay with a small drop off, right? Because I get it, right? You would think that a guy that's getting paid $15 million or $17 million, or one of the highest paid centers in the league, you would think that there should be a drop off. But I think that Newsel has to further prove that he can be the guy in this run game because I feel like this is going to be a big foundation of what this offense is and how they're going to be successful this year in year 2 of Zach Robinson calling plays. Yeah, he has to make sure he's tight in that as far as that run game because that's going to be the basis of his offense as a whole.
And last but not least, Free, special teams. What are we looking for as far as maybe a little kicker competition and maybe a little competition with punt return and kick return?
We'll see if we get a competition there. Again, I expect Jamal Agnew and Ray McLeod to be the return guys. And, we saw this team invest a lot of resources this offseason, arguably, relatively speaking, more resources in the special teams than they did in the defense and free agency. And it was just like, what are we doing here? But obviously the draft happened and it was like, okay, it's fine. But yeah, I think the big question is Koo going to have a rebound season? And the Falcons brought in competition. What is Lenny Craig going to be looking like? Is he going to look like a guy that's ready to push Koo, or is he going to be a guy that, once the bright lights turn on, making that jump from, playing in Germany, no offense to the European fans, but probably in front of like 5,000 people to, playing in front of, 70,000 people. How is he going to handle that sort of transition? We'll find out later this summer, but it's really, I think it's Koo's job to lose. And it's ultimately, are we going to be sitting here being like, oh, Koo's back, when we get to the preseason and training camp, or are we going to be like, oh, maybe he's not quite back? And so that to me is the big question.
Yeah.
And with Lenny Craig, I think this is one that's going to be interesting. I know for a fact, Free, that we're going to see him play. He's going to play. He's not going to get sat down because, we're going to save it for the regular season. No, it's a competition out here. It's a real legitimate competition. And I wholeheartedly believe that because if you had told me that midway through the season and Koo is struggling and that they were going to bring in someone that's younger and got a strong leg and they could sign him early on in the offseason, yeah, I probably wouldn't have believed you. But they went out and got this guy. They liked what they saw. Obviously, the international roster piece comes into play too, so it might be a little finessing with that as well. But I do think that, Lenny has a real shot at overtaking this thing because, the way Koo lost games last year, I'm still a little touched by that. And I know Free, what I'm saying? I know that's your boy. I know it's your dog, but hey, man, competition breeds greatness in my humble opinion. So I think that, it's going to be interesting to watch once they start kicking those balls through the uprights.
Yeah. So, Jarvis, we are in the midst of list season still as we await the start of training camp, and Pro Football Network joined in on the fun, ranking the 25 returning head coaches in the NFL, with, of course, first-year head coaches excluded, like true first-year head coaches. That said, Raheem Morris was ranked 22nd on the list out of 25. So I asked if it was too low. Well, tell me this first. Too low, too high, or just right? Just answer that flat out.
Ooh, I think it might be a little too low. I mean,
Okay,
Yeah.
so if you think it was too low,
Yeah.
then where should he have been ranked and why?
I think more so in the teens, because here's the thing. I think that a lot of his issues were more on display because the Falcons play a little bit more in prime time. So everybody, oh man, why you didn't call that timeout? Oh man, what's going on with Kirk Cousins? Why y'all actually went into a game against one of the sorriest teams in the league and the Raiders and had that type of game plan? Why don't you just put the young boy in? So all of his issues were on full display. And I think that's
Mhm.
probably why he was ranked so low. And I'm not saying he should be 15, maybe 19, 20, I'm not, but to be one of the worst coaches in the league in his first year, I think that's a
Yeah.
little harsh. And I think it's mostly because of what dealing with the issues of going in your first year being a head coach. He's been one before, but
Yeah.
it's still, you still have to get back in the saddle and kind of get used to things. And I think it was because it was on full on display in those primetime games. And of course the whole quarterback drama, that didn't help at all either.
Yeah, it definitely feels like, wow. So we're basically saying that we see Ra as bottom third. I mean,
Yeah.
and I'm not sure that I would agree that Raheem Morris belongs in the bottom third.
Can I add this too, T?
Yes,
Like
yeah.
the coaches that surround him, that he's surrounded by, those
Yeah.
coaches about to get fired.
Yeah.
And I think we all can agree that Rod's not about to get fired, right?
Yeah.
If somebody gets fired after it, free.
Speak for yourself, Jarvis Davis.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm gonna speak for myself. I don't think Rod's gonna get fired unless they go 2-15. He probably might get fired if that happens, but I don't see him being a hot seat guy going into the season. We're not having those conversations. We're having conversations about Terry Fontenot. We're not having conversations about Rod being on the hot seat, and that's what he's surrounded by, being at the bottom of that list.
Yeah, and I think for me, he's more like on the warm seat. And the reason I say warm seat, is because he has the potential to be on the hot seat,
Sure.
dictated by how the season ends, not just predicated. And I think I may have said this on the Thursday party last week, not just predicated on the number of wins, but how you get there. Because you could have a 9-8 season and not get to the postseason, but if you went 5 straight, 3 straight, 4 straight losses at the end of the season, like you did last year, and lost your way out of the postseason, that's a different 9-8, right?
Mhm.
Or you can go 8-9 and it could be that same situation. So I do think with him, it's more of like a warm seat for me, but I do also agree with you. I did think 22 is a bit low as well, because I don't feel like he's a bottom third kind of coach. I didn't think he did a bottom third job in his first season, all things considered. But Aaron, let me ask you the first part of that question. For the ranking of 22 out of the 25 returning head coaches, too low, too high, just right?
Well, when I initially saw it, I was like, that feels a little low. I figured similar to Jarvis, like 18, 19 probably feels fair for him. But then when I looked at the list, I was like, yeah, it's really hard to because like you look at like the top 19, 20 guys, like all of those guys, what they have that Raheem Morris doesn't necessarily have is they have a recent winning season or playoff season. And then you look at guys like Jonathan Gannon and Shane Steichen that are right above Raheem Morris at 20 and 21. And like, I think the thing that gives them the bump is like those coaches don't have the same level of expectation going into last year as Raheem Morris did. Like everybody thought with the addition of Kirk Cousins, the Falcons are shoo-in to win the division. And midway through the season, it was like, oh yeah, they're looking good. And then the bottom fell out. And I think that left a bad taste in people's minds. And you look at, say, a Shane Steichen, and it's like he did a really good job in his first year when he had to play with Gardner Minshew, did less good job last year. But I think because of the turmoil going on with the quarterback position, he probably gets more of a bump in that regard, that the Colts are still a competitive team, even if they're only 500 under him in 2 years. And Jonathan Gannon, I think people look at that situation that he inherited in Arizona. That was a complete rebuild. And for them to go from like 4 wins to 8 wins last year, I think people are looking at the arrow pointing up for him. That gives him a bump in that. And so ultimately, to answer your question, T, like when I looked at the list, I was like, yeah, I mean, 22 feels fair. Like maybe I could bump him up a couple of spots, but at this stage, like he's probably in the bottom third of those coaches that at least, when you're talking about, as you said, Like these are the 25 or so guys that kept their jobs. Like basically, if you're significantly worse than what Raheem Morris was, like you don't have a job anymore. So you're really, it's like, like 25 is like the bare minimum of just basically like, oh, I can keep my job. That's basically what it is. And so I think Raheem Morris, passed that last year. And I think there's some open debate over whether or not he's going to get there this year if the team doesn't perform up to expectations again.
Yeah. And I think you're absolutely right. It was sort of the wins that sometimes count. Like if you end the season, and I mean, I know San Francisco ended up not being the best team, if you will, but when I look back at the regular season for the Cardinals, maybe because the NFC West ended up being a little bit more of a clusterfuffle than people thought, but they were actually still in the conversation for a long time about going into the postseason and ended the season routing the San Francisco 49ers. So sometimes that recency effect does actually have sometimes that recency effect has an effect on people's opinions. And unfortunately, Jarvis, just because of the way that the Falcons lost, and coupled with, just as you mentioned, that drama with Kirk Cousins, as you guys mentioned, sometimes that kind of, and it's still a dark cloud over him. So it's like hard to get away from thinking about that because that's still a legit situation. But I guess, again, it just feels like, dang, if I look at 32 teams and he's 25, but then, so that puts you in the bottom third. But then when I look at 22 out of 25 coaches that are returning, then it's not even the bottom third. Like, what is that? The bottom, that could be the bottom anything. Like, honestly, because yeah, right. Because, yeah. So I think for me, that was a little bit of a challenge because I guess I don't quite see him that way when I'm just looking at the numbers in their purest form. But anyway, a part of how you can get that number changed for next year is the only other question that I have for you guys in terms of if you saw the number being a little too low or even just right, how do you still bump him up, Jarvis? What does he have to do as a coach to bump up?
He has to win. He has to win in the division. I think winning the division, that gets you into the playoffs. And I think that if Michael Penix can get that big bump, like big jump in as far as production and like really get the ball rolling and this offense gets humming and this defense figures out a way to get to the quarterback on a consistent basis, I think those are two factors that he's going to be around for a while if that were to happen, because if those things happen, I feel like they can win the division. Like Tampa has been consistent as all get out winning the division, sure. Yeah. But do they have holes? Yeah, because the Falcons swept them last year, right? All the crap everybody was talking about, the Falcons and Raheem Morris and how he handled the situations and all that, they still kicked the crap out of the Bucks when they went into town and when they came here too. So I think it's just a matter of showing that type of play in those games. Do it throughout the season. If you could do that, I feel like he'll be totally fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I mean, you look at Todd Bowles on this ranking, he's 14. Why is Todd Bowles on this ranking? Because the Bucs always win the division. So, like, to me, like, if you're Raheem, you could probably bump yourself up, 10 spots on next year's rankings just by winning the division and making the playoffs. Mm-hmm. And so, like Jarvis said, I think ultimately, at the end of the day, it just boils down to wins. This is, year 3 of the Falcons having expectations and, third time's the charm, as they say. And they need to deliver on those expectations. That's why earlier when Jarvis said, like, I don't think Raheem is on the hot seat, I agree with him. Relatively speaking, within the building, there's less pressure on Raheem Morris than there is on Terry Fontenot. But if we get another year of disappointing, outcomes this upcoming season, like I know this fan base is not going to be happy at the end of the season. And that trickles up to Arthur Blank when, we're talking about it on this show and I'm talking about Locked On Falcons and 92-90 Games talking about it and all these other shows are talking about, should we keep Raheem, all that stuff. Like the people in the building that make those decisions hear that stuff, and that's ultimately going to be a factor if this team winds up falling short of expectations again.
Yeah. Well, one of the ways that the conversation about ranking Raw can change is if the offense changes. How does the dialogue hit different for this offense? We'll discuss when we run it back. So the Athletic picked the Falcons offense as a breakout candidate in 2025. The article cited Zach Robinson being able to squeeze every bit of juice out of a one-legged Kirk Cousins, and Michael Penix Jr. showing some promise in his last three starts last season. So for you, Jarvis, who's the person or position group that has to take the next step to put this offense in that kind of conversation to be a breakout?
It has to be the offensive line for me. I have to start up front. Like you got four returning starters. You got Ryan Newsel coming in to play. He played with those four starters, so he has some continuity there. And he used to take snaps from Michael Penix Jr. with their second team, so there's some familiarity there. And I think that if this group is able to continue to do what they did last year, because Bijan Robinson had a really good season. We just weren't talking about it because Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry had an amazing season, especially with the age of those guys and where they are in their careers. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, everybody was talking about that. But, oh, my gosh, the third dude, he's young and he's ready to roll. And he out here taking pictures with Christian McCaffrey, who looks like he's on steroids or something. I don't know what's going on here, and Christian McCaffrey is taking him under his wing and all that stuff with captions and stuff. Like, yeah, man, this is an opportunity for this offensive line to really put themselves on the map. I know Christian Lindstrom is already there. Like, a lot of people are starting to talk about Christian Lindstrom. Oh, he's the best guard in the league. Oh, yeah, we've been through that. Because the conversation used to be centered around Quentin Nelson. And he kind of has dealt with some injuries and all that stuff. So now it's starting to shift towards, hey, man, this dude down in Atlanta is pretty doggone good. And it's a reason why they pay him all that doggone money. So I think this offensive line group has the opportunity to really establish themselves as one of those groups, one of the better groups in the league. I'm not saying they're going to surpass the Eagles. I'm not saying that. But they can put themselves at least in that. Because the Eagles they're in their own tier, I would say. They can get in that second tier like, oh, the Eagles are the amazing, hands down, best offensive line in the league. But, hey, man, the Falcons, they got a pretty good one, too.
Yeah. Yeah. What about you, Aaron, when you kind of look at what would make this team not just a candidate for a breakout offense, but actually being a breakout offense? Who's the person or who's the position group? What's the position group that has to take that next step?
Well, I'm not going to surprise anybody who's a regular listener of this show or Locked on Falcons. I'm going to say Zach Robinson. Now, I was hoping Jarvis would not go offensive line just so I could be like, hey, let's talk about the offensive line for a second. And let me surprise folks by not saying Zach Robinson. But, I'm going to be me. And I'm going to say Zach Robinson. And I think with Zach Robinson, he did a great job last year, relatively speaking, considering the Falcons didn't have play action passing in their offense. And Jarvis and I talked about this on Friday on Locked on Falcons. But like you look at some of the numbers, that if this team had just a average play action passing attack, they would have been the number one passing attack in the NFL. They would have been top 5 in a lot of categories. And that's what the goal is for this team to build. I think we've seen enough from Michael Penix, not only in college and in his 3 starts, to believe what he was in college can translate to the NFL, which is an operator, which is a guy that if you give him the weapons and the system, he can operate that system at a high level and execute that system at a high level. And so my question is, Zach Robinson, you have a decent system, but do you have a great system? Like so many of your peers that come from that Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay coaching tree. We saw Liam Cohen, who was another McVay protege, have a lot of success in Tampa Bay last year, and it's why he's the head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars. I want Zach Robinson to have that type of year where we're sitting here on these football parties in December being like, yeah, I don't think Zach Robinson is going to be back next year because he's the hottest name in coaching. He's going to be a head coach somewhere in 2026. I want to have that conversation. That is a good sign that this offense is humming at a high level. The Bucs, they were a top 5 offense in almost every single category. I think the Falcons have the potential to be that. I just think they need the play calling to deliver on that. And if they do, then I think all the pieces will fall into place.
Well, I will follow Aaron's lead and I will select Kevin Coger as my guy, because Kevin Coger, if you can get more for less out of Kyle Pitts, then you will have earned your job. You will have earned your job as the breakout assistant for this Atlanta Falcons coaching staff. I do know that Kyle Pitts is the kind of guy, for the most part, who probably is self-motivated. It's probably intrinsic motivation for him, but somehow, some way, Kevin is going to have to tap into something to be able to get out of Kyle Pitts the thing that everybody keeps waiting to see resurface. So that's who I'll have my eye on as far as who helps this offense to be a breakout candidate. Now, I thought this was interesting because, of course, again, still in list season, 5 Falcons were chosen for ESPN's all-quarter century team. We're talking Julio Jones, Tony Gonzalez, Kyle Shanahan, Devin Hester, and Calais Campbell. So I got to ask Jarvis, let's start with, did they even get this list right?
I mean, I know that this list was comprised of just guys who started with 2000 and it up until now. But if we're talking about Falcons that should have been on that list, regardless of who's on the list right now, I got to start with Alex Mack. 7-time Pro Bowler, 3-time All-Pro. The man made the Pro Bowl at 36 years old. He was basically on one leg with the San Francisco 49ers. Like, this man is going to the Hall of Fame. Like,
No doubt.
I wholeheartedly believe that. So if you asking me, like, all right, what guys should be on this list as a Falcon, it has to be Alex Mack. This dude took this offensive line from straight up mid to one of the better offenses and being the anchor for the best offense in the league that year. That's why Kyle Shanahan is on this list. They averaged 33 points a doggone game, you know. And, you know, he might be a Richard, but hey, man, the man can call plays, you know. So in the NFL, they don't care if you're a Richard or not. Like, if you can produce, you're going to get there. So, yeah, I think that Alex Mack should, hands down, we're talking about specific Falcons players being on this list. Well, Calais Campbell, yeah, it was 0 1 year. Come on, man.
Yeah.
What are we talking about? So, but yeah, if we're talking about that specifically, Falcons player, it has to be Alex Mack for me, hands down.
Yeah, I like that call for Alex Mack, and I like that call out on Calais Campbell because it's like, okay, we're talking about a year here. Like, can he even, like, to me, it's more of if you speak of a player and you identify that player with that team, or that player has played at least 50% or around 50% of his career with that team, or has had the accolades and all of the above for Alex Mack, by the way, because he played about 6 seasons with the Browns before he came over to the Falcons, played about 5 seasons with the Falcons. But when you talk about him being on second team and his Pro Bowl years, many of those accolades actually came during his time with the Falcons. So I really like that one as a call on the list to maybe replace Calais Campbell at a minimum. But for you, Aaron, when you kind of hear that list, you hear Julio, Tony Gonzalez, Shanahan, Devin Hester, Calais. Did ESPN get this all-quarter century team right, or is there a Falcon that should be on the list and maybe one of these guys that shouldn't?
No, I'm with Jarvis on this. Alex Mack to me was the one player that I think you could make an argument for. Now they put Jason Kelce on the list, and I was like, okay, well, I mean, if you're going to bump Alex Mack for one, you know, another Hall of Fame center that is definitely going to the Hall of Fame, like I get Jason Kelce, and it was, to me, my beef was just like, why did they had like doubled up on like guards and tackles, but for some reason they didn't double up on centers, you know, and have like a second string or whatever you want to call it for this century. So it was just like, it felt like, you know, like that was the Alex Smith spot. Like, why did you leave that one spot open off of that? And so that was sort of my takeaway looking at the list. It was like, I think everybody else that they put on that list was well deserved of being on that list. Obviously Calais Campbell, you know, spent 1 year in Atlanta, but when you look at what he did in Jacksonville and Arizona, well deserving of being on the list. So, you know, it's just a semantics thing when you're like, he's a Falcon. Yeah, technically he is a Falcon, just like he is a Dolphin, but like no one considers what Calais Campbell did in the past quarter century based off of what he did in those 2 spots. But yeah, I think for the most part, Alex Mack's probably the one player that you would sit there and say, like, why isn't he on the list? But when it's Jason Kelce, it's like, okay, I get it. Like, I'm not going to complain too much, but he's the one sort of snub I think that was deserving.
Jarvis, you had a look on your face.
Yeah, I mean, why do we be so disrespectful to John Abraham? Yeah, 133 sacks, 5-time Pro Bowl, 3-time All-Pro. I mean, do they not like Abe or something? I'm confused because 133 sacks, not just right at the borderline 100 sacks, you know, because everybody talking about, oh yeah, Calais Campbell got to 100 sacks, Hall of Fame. Hey, what about John Abraham?
Yeah,
man was an absolute menace off the edge when he played. So yeah, that was my little honorable mention, like heartfelt, like, oh man, why we can't have 55 on the joint? You know what I'm saying? Like, can we just put him at a third string? You know what I'm saying? Because that list is pretty doggone good. It's pretty good.
He might be third team all quarter century.
Right. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? And that's okay. You know what I'm saying? The man put in work. He put up some really good numbers, and guys on that list are really great. But I just had to mention Abe because I felt like maybe something going on with there. Like we need to find out what's going on with Abe and why he's not even in the conversation of being in the Hall of Fame. It's just weird.
I think it's because of the things that you guys mentioned. Unfortunately, sometimes it's historical. And the fact that we always go back to, we haven't seen any real pass rush since the days of John Abraham. That's a problem because a lot of times the recency effect is also what gets you the kudos. And the recency effect for the Falcons as it relates to a pass rush is not good. So unfortunately for John Abraham being with a franchise that is much maligned in a space where he was so brilliant, probably plays a little bit of a factor in why we don't see what we should see in him getting that high honor and respect that he deserved. But Dade City put some respect on Michael Penix Jr.'s name. We'll discuss in the look ahead. So, Aaron, Michael Penix Jr. received the special honor of having a street named after him in his hometown of Dade City, Florida. What do you think about that? And what would be the biggest honor your hometown could bestow upon you?
Well, initially when I saw the news, I was like, this man started 3 games. He's already getting the street name. But then I realized it's his hometown. And I was like, oh, okay, that makes more sense. Right. I was just thinking like he was in like a random city in America, like he was getting a street name there. I'm like, we're doing this after 3 games, but then it was like, oh, it's his hometown. So reading
everybody gets a trophy situation.
Reading is fundamental. When I actually reread the thing, I was like, oh, it's his hometown. That makes sense. He definitely deserves that in his hometown. Yes. And so like my initial thought was like, why? And then it was like, oh yeah, this makes total sense. So good for him, good for his hometown, honoring him. And hopefully, we'll be seeing some streets named after him in Atlanta in the future, potentially, if he can have some of the success that a lot of us think he can have here in Atlanta over the next decade plus. As far as what my hometown could honor me with, my brain immediately went to like a all-you-can-eat buffet or something like that. That would get to my spirit of just like, some delicious, food experience or something like that. That's what it would be for me. So something along those lines, I don't know, something that is in reference to food somehow, some way.
Me too. I'm with you, Free. I'm right here, man. I'm right here. What about you, Jarvis? What did you think about MPX getting that honor bestowed on him by Dade City? And how would you like the A? Are you?
Wow, that'd be very interesting. But shout out to Michael Penix Jr. Like that is got to be the most humbling probably experience, because when you think about just coming up in your hometown, looking at different places you used to go hang out when you're going down there, and if you played at the local park and like, yeah, man, I remember when I was down here and all this stuff. And then at that same intersection, you got the doggone street name right there named after you. That got to be super, super dope. So, yeah, I think that's a really cool thing. And by the way, Free, to your point, if he wins a Super Bowl, the man gonna have a strip club named after him. I promise you. Like he's gonna be MPX, or MPXXX. So the people are going to love him, and everybody's going to honor him if that were to happen. But in all seriousness, though, if something were to be named after me, or if I'm honored in my hometown, it would have to be a wing spot. Have to be a wing spot in my name. And then they would have like sweet tea.
Pepper for life.
Yeah. Hot sprinkle with lemon pepper, baby. You know what I'm saying? You can't go wrong with it. Then have the sweet tea. Then have different flavors of teas. Maybe name them after players and all that stuff. I kind of stole that from Hungry AF. I don't know if y'all know about that. Hungry AF got some really good names and stuff like that. So yeah, different types of sweet tea. You know what I'm saying? Have them named after like J-Bo's wings. You know what I'm saying? I don't know if y'all noticed, but it feels like I've thought about this before. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. This is a well thought out answer. I had to pull some teeth we had to pull from the depths of our souls. You, however, have pontificated on this.
Well, sometimes, you like to be
Always
honored. Like, that's cool. It's cool to be honored. Like, people to acknowledge you for the work you've done and what you've done for the community and all that stuff. That's cool. That's really cool. So, I have a plan, seemingly, if that were to happen. So, yeah, but that'll be dope, though. It'll be dope.
Yeah, no, that is cool, because I think when people, like, I don't know if it was my nephew who maybe went to my old high school or something where they're doing 7-on-7s, and he's just like, oh my God, I saw your picture in the Hall of Fame at the high school. And I'm like, oh, so yeah, no, it is. It's kind of
Whoa, T. Hold on now. How you gonna skip past that like that now? You're in the Hall of Fame at your school?
Yes. At both of them and on some level. So
two Hall of Fame.
Wow.
Multi Hall of Fame.
You see how she's trying to be humble? Yeah, I'm actually I'm into
big deal.
Two different schools,
At two different schools. I got my name.
That's how I do it,
It's truly not a big deal.
Yeah, I don't know. See, I don't think people be sleeping on T, Free, because she is like next level stuff, man. But like, you know what I'm saying? Like, come on, I'm gonna see her tomorrow. You know what I'm saying? At an event, you know what I'm saying? She got the invite before I did.
Invite me in, man. Yeah, I know, right? I'm like, I got multiple invites, but now I'm being told, like, I don't know. I'm like, whatever. But you know me, I will pull up in a heartbeat, like they tell. See, but we've been taught and told that you should pull up and act like you've been there.
Yes,
Falcons gone and pull up and act like you've been there, and that way you get to the postseason. Like, act like you've been there. That's what we want to see from you. We want to see you behave and perform like you've been there, so that you can actually get back there. But yeah, I thought about it a little bit, and if I were to have something, before I talk about mine, Free, you got to tell the people where you're from originally, where you grew up.
I'm from the place they call Bad News, Virginia, the same hometown as Michael Vick and Allen Iverson. So Newport News, Virginia is where I'm from.
Love Newport News. Don't hate on Newport News. I have a lot of beautiful memories from that area. Just saying. Yeah, it's a lovely place.
I do too. The first 18 years of my life, a lot of beautiful memories. Yeah.
Exactly. So I would actually put mine in my original hometown as opposed to the place I grew up in. So I was born and raised in New Orleans until I was 5. And then we moved to this little town outside of New Orleans where I was raised called Houma, Louisiana, which nobody knows where the hell that is. So I would actually have my place set up somewhere in either the 9th Ward or the 17th. And if you know anything about New Orleans, you know the 9th Ward. And if you know anything about Xavier, you know the 17th. So I'd have like 2 locations of my sweet tea sweet shop, because I got to have some bread pudding, some sweet potato pie. I got to have some pecan candy, or pralines, as you non-New Orleanians call it. I got to have some beignets. And like Jarvis, I have to have all kinds of flavors of sweet tea. I know sweet tea does not go with sweets, but it's my shop. So like I get to do what I want to.
Tea. All I ask with this shop that the bread pudding is on point, because I've never gotten a mid bread pudding. Either it's really, really good, or it is awesome.
Really bad. There is no middle ground.
Yes, there's no middle ground when it comes to bread pudding, like, at all.
Now, I don't quite understand what the rationale is about why there's no middle ground on bread pudding, but it is truly maybe the homemade sweets dish that has no middle ground. You either get that right or it's a hot mess. And there's no middle. So that's what I would do if I had the opportunity to be honored in my hometown. And I thought it was cool too, because when I saw that about Michael Penix Jr. real quick, and then we'll move on. When I saw that about Michael Penix Jr., I agree with you, Jarvis. I was like, wow, that was a pretty high honor to bestow on him, because he hasn't quite reached that level that you would expect. And that level may be winning a Super Bowl, or it may be winning a national championship, although of course he had an appearance. But my mind went to Teddy Bridgewater, because I was like, do you know what Teddy Bridgewater did right around the way? Because, Dade County, Dade City, Miami Gardens, kind of right around the way. I was like, dude went back to his high school. And yes, I do follow him because their dance instructor is like a national champion. She's been featured on all these other shows. So I followed her. Then I started following Teddy. And Teddy Bridgewater went back straight undefeated season and got a national championship at his alma mater in his first year as a head coach. That That's gangster. And so I wanted to see, like, what did Miami do for Teddy Bridgewater, but much the same. Like, Teddy Bridgewater has like all these accolades and naming rights and all this other stuff that they did for him in Miami Gardens. So, and of course, he's still an NFL quarterback. Go figure. Like, Teddy Bridgewater keeps a job. One more thing before we wrap up, taking it back to the Falcons. Drake London delivered a huge surprise to his alma mater. Good guy, going back and giving back to his high school, which I think is also such an awesome thing to be able to do. First of all, surprising them by showing up and delivering things to Moore Park. That's where he grew up, obviously out in California, and was able to give those guys new sets of cleats and all sorts of just like super cool things to put their football program. First of all, he put their football program on the map, but secondly, to give those guys those new cleats and just give them so many other things to kind of upgrade their program. I thought, Jarvis, that was pretty cool stuff too.
Absolutely. This is the type of stuff that I want to hear about during this time because we know, and
Yes.
I don't think, and let me say this, I feel like this time hasn't been like it was, like what we used to, right? Because it seems like soon as that mandatory minutes break, and then you got that little 4 week to 5 week break between that and training camp when we got reports, it seems like the police blotter just starts cranking up, but I don't think we've seen that much as of late, but this is the type of stuff that I want to hear, that I like to hear, like guys going back to talk to their high schools and talk to the kids, and then blessing the kids with product and all that stuff, man. That is just an absolute. I love that type of stuff because, like, these kids, as much as people want to talk about this generation and all that stuff, like showing these kids, this generation, that you care means a lot. They might not show it. They might not show it
Lord knows
in the moment, but my God, they're going to remember it, and they're going to value what you bring to the table, what you did by giving your time. And for him to be able to do that to his whole high school, that's actually really, really cool.
And Free, I think Jarvis actually mentioned another key part of why that makes it such a wonderful experience, not just getting those brand new cleats and other good gear and merch, but just having the chance to even interact with somebody like Drake London. That is the kind of thing that can impact those guys really for the long term. They may look back, and whether it's what they do in their professional careers or how it impacts them personally, you can see so much of an opportunity there for Drake London to be able to also interact with those players.
Yeah, I mean, for probably a handful of the kids that play at that high school, like, they have visions of playing beyond high school football, and sort of seeing Drake London and, hearing from Drake London, interacting with Drake London, that helps those guys. And for everybody else on the team that probably is not going to play football beyond high school, it's still a net positive for them to have that sort of interaction and seeing a player and looking at, what Drake London was able to take football beyond and be a professional at it. They can apply some of those same lessons to whatever they wind up doing that is not football related and whatnot. And, it's always just cool to see someone famous like, oh, I know that guy. And then you can tell your friends, hey, me and Drake London, we're best friends. Like we hung out, he bought me cleats, all that stuff. Like, right. So there's always like some type of benefit that you can find some way to spin it in a positive way. So it's always great to hear, these types of stories, as Jarvis said. Like before, it was like, if we hear any news from you between middle of June and middle of July, like almost always is a bad sign. And sort of now you just hear, hey, he's going back to this school and buying cleats, this guy's getting married, all these types of. So you're seeing a lot more positive human interest stories, and I think this is another one.
Yeah, I really like that. And I think you make a good point. If I'm going across social media and I'm seeing things like Jalen Walker at Sac Summit, or I'm seeing things like Drake London giving back to his school, that makes me happy, because I don't want us to, and for the Falcons, we really haven't had to do a lot of that, if we're being honest, over the years. But the closer we get to training camp and we don't have any infractions or any criminal type stories to talk about, the better. Because that means to me, you guys are focused on, hey, I'm going to still do something related to football. I'm still going to do some positive things, and I'm going to keep my head focused. I'm going to stay focused on I don't want to say the finish line, but kind of those milestones to get you to the finish line, right? They got themselves through voluntary OTAs, check. They got themselves through mandatory mini camp, check. Now it's time to get yourself through the 5 weeks without injury. And I mean injury as far as like we said, any type of criminal reports, but also physical injury. Prayers up for those guys that nothing happens to them. Just get yourself to training camp, and we're almost to that finish line. Hey, listen, there's no show Thursday. I know you guys are not going to know what to do with yourselves. I mean, no Aaron, no Jarvis, no Maria, no Tenitra. Not Thursday, but we will be back Monday, and so will Tori. So as always, we appreciate you guys. Thanks especially to our everydayers for making the Atlanta Football Party the first listen of the day. Be sure to stop by Locked On Falcons with Aaron and his frequent guest analyst Jarvis as your second listen. And always check out some of Tori's work at atlantafalcons.com. Like I said, she'll be back with us next week. You guys be safe out there for your 4th of July weekend, and we'll see you next time.